know you're scared, but I'm here to protect you.
Over the past few years, there's been a growing trend in Hollywood to focus more on diversity and representation in films. While you can say this is definitely a positive development, there is a concern that this focus on gender and ethnicity is being prioritized over the quality of the story and of franchises as a whole. The main criticism of this trend is that it leads to a shallow and superficial approach to storytelling. When studios prioritize gender and ethnicity over the storytelling and the structure of the plot, the result can be a movie or a show that feels forced and inauthentic. This is because, in many cases, the focus on diversity and representation is seen as merely a checkbox that needs to be ticked off, rather than an integral part of the story.
I'm joining the club.
You guys are really smart about this science stuff, but I know New York. And I can borrow a car from my uncle.
You didn't disclose that the vehicle was going to be a hearse.
It's a Cadillac!
For example, the recent Ghostbusters reboot was heavily criticized for being shallow and uninspired and a very lackluster retread of the original that relied too heavily on the gender of its cast. It was basically, hey, it's Ghostbusters, guys, but we're all girls. They expected the names of the actors to be a big draw. They also relied on the comedic elements, which really were not that funny. But the story was also lackluster, and more importantly, the movie failed to capture the spirit of the original Ghostbusters, what made everyone like it in the first place, and it wasn't because of the gender. When studios try too hard to appeal to different demographics by just adding in characters of different ethnicities or genders, all they serve to do is end up creating characters that feel like token representatives, rather than fully developed individuals. This can be especially problematic when dealing with characters that already have an established history and backstory. The recent Star Wars trilogy is an example of this issue. While the trilogy was lauded for its diversity, many fans felt that the new characters lacked depth and complexity of the original characters. The characters felt like they were created to appeal to different demographics rather than primarily being an integral part of the story. In other instances, not to mention within this franchise just mentioned as well, it almost seems as though the new characters are straight up trying to outdo the original characters when that shouldn't be the aim. In Terminator Dark Fate, the latest installment in the Terminator franchise, everyone was praising the diverse cast, which included women and ethnic minorities in prominent roles. By the way, something that wasn't a novelty when this movie was released. This has been something that's been happening for many decades before this. And you can make the excuse that the movie was just bad overall, whether it had a female lead or not. Many fans felt that the movie was lackluster and failed to capture the intensity and the excitement of the earlier films in the series. I mean, Dark Fate lost more than $120 million at the box office, ruling out any chance of further sequels. And I'm not saying there are not going to be sequels or other movies in the future, but there's certainly a disconnect. The movie came off feeling like a cash grab because it was clear there was no passion in creating the plot, which was rinse and reused. The movie blatantly ignored the Douglas Adams time travel rule, which applies to the first two Terminator movies, which is you can't change anything because it already happens, and Dark Fate seemed to ignore that. The movie pretended to be offering something new to the franchise while just being a diluted copy of the earlier movies. Just like the Jurassic World movies, they seem to fail to capture the magic of what made the initial movie so successful. To the fans, Terminator Dark Fate was basically an FU to the first two films, which everybody loved. They also disrespected those movies by killing off John Connor early off, making it so Sarah was not able to protect her son, and rendering everything that happened in the earlier movies completely pointless. And coming back to why it seems as though the studios are blatantly disrespecting the idea of female characters and ethnic minorities is because they overshadow original established characters just to place someone who fits those boxes in that role. For many viewers, it can feel as if established stories are being appropriated and merely replacing the male lead with a female one, instead of making a new story that is tailored to the female lead, allowing her to make her own mark. This approach of seeming to just be role-playing an already established character can come across as lacking authenticity and depth. Another example is Doctor Who, the long-running British sci-fi show that has recently made headlines for its efforts to diversify its cast, including the introduction of a female doctor played by Jodie Whittaker, and in my opinion, the worst doctor to date. While many fans have welcomed these changes, others have criticized the show for losing its edge and relying too heavily on political correctness. It doesn't help the case for female lead characters when you change the show so much to this degree, make the female character unlikable and uncharismatic, and essentially make the story unwatchable. I'm not saying everybody feels this way, but a significant amount of the fans did, including us female fans. It just gives off the aura that the female characters make things worse, and People will draw that correlation, especially when there's been a long-standing character who fits a certain pattern, which in Doctor Who's case is that his character or expression was always male. Regardless of them saying he could change into anyone, every other Doctor that had come before him was male, and nobody cared. Another example is Ocean's 8. This female-led spin-off of the Ocean's 11 franchise was praised for its all-star cast of female actors, including Sandra Bullock, Cate Blanchett, and Rihanna. Based on what fans are saying, the fans felt like the movie relied too heavily on the gender of its cast and lacked the originality and excitement of the earlier films. It was clear that the marketing of this film was that this is the female version. See guys? See how powerful we are? We can do it too. It's very cringy, and it makes females seem as though the only way they can make a successful franchise is if they piggyback off the franchise that male established characters already have. It's worth noting that not all films or shows that prioritize diversity over storytelling are necessarily bad or horrible. However, when diversity is seen as the sole selling point of a franchise, it can sometimes lead to a lack of depth and substance in the storytelling. Ultimately, a successful franchise needs to strike a balance between representation and quality storytelling to engage and entertain its audience, and it has to be believable. If you're doing a historical piece about ancient China, it does not make sense to make 50% to 60% of the cast white or black, does it? It appears that diversity is now being used as a crutch or an excuse to avoid creating compelling characters and stories. If studios focus solely on representation to the exclusion of all else, it absolves them and the creators of the movies and shows from any responsibility to make engaging stories. All that seems to matter is that the audience sees people on screen who look like them, and that is the only way they can relate to them. As a female, I can only relate to someone if they're female. As an Asian, I can only relate to them if they're Asian. However, the problem is that this emphasis on representation can backfire, with audiences becoming ashamed of the very representation they once wanted because of how it is now being displayed. For instance, imagine creating a show or series based on a popular franchise like The Witcher or Willow and filling it with diverse characters, but making it the worst thing anyone has ever watched by removing any passion and essentially creating garbage entertainment. In doing that, the studios, whether they're aware of it or not, are actually doing a disservice to minorities by making it seem like they're only worthy of low-quality TV shows or entertainment, devoid of any real character or depth. This is very troubling, and instead of taking responsibility for creating subpar content, the studios often then shift the blame to the audiences, which mind you also comprises of ethnic minorities and the female gender, or whatever is being underrepresented, by labeling them as toxic and suggesting that they're the problem. This is not the solution, and it only serves to deepen the divide between the studios and their audiences. Telling someone that they're toxic for voicing that they don't like something and that you're actually doing a disservice to them, and then blaming the problem on another group of the demographic, singling them out and saying that the majority of people who are saying this belong to that group, essentially undermines the voices of ethnic minorities and the underrepresented. Essentially, their voices don't matter. And any of you try to say that their voices matter, they only matter if you agree with the studios. It is important to prioritize diversity and representation, sure, but not at the expense of quality storytelling and character development. When the ultimate focus of a movie is on diversity, it detracts from the quality of the story. When studios prioritize diversity, it can lead to a fixation on surface-level issues rather than the underlying themes and messages of the story. You want people to be colorblind, but your main focus is on color. Your main part of marketing is having people focus on someone's color instead of their achievements. You want people to see ethnic minorities as human beings who have their own goals and desires and talents, but yet you minimize their achievements by giving them titles as the first black person to do this, as if they stand alone in a different category, not worthy of everybody else.
Idris Elba is getting candid about racism in Hollywood and his reasons behind pursuing an entertainment career. When talking about why he chose a career in entertainment, the prolific actor explained that he didn't become an actor because I didn't see black people doing it and I wanted to change that. I did it because I thought that's a great profession and I could do a good job at it. Elba continued, as you get up the ladder, you get asked what it's like to be the first black to do this or that. Well, it's the same as it would be if I were white. It's the first time for me. I don't want to be the first black, I'm the first Idris.
Studios must remember that a good story is essential to a successful franchise, and that diversity and representation should be integrated into the story rather than being a superficial addition. It also is worth noting that stories can still be told with homogenous characters. Even if I'm not part of that ethnic group, if I want to have a story told to me about a specific part of the world and historical past with a specific demographic, it would certainly take me out of it to see Puerto Rican people in the midst of a Viking village as one of the Vikings. It's downright insulting, and the audience can see right through it. It's not realistic, it's not believable, it's not authentic. The audience can see through the studios using them, especially the group that they're trying to represent, as a means to try and prove how not prejudiced they are, all while showing their blatant prejudice. By striking a balance between diversity and storytelling, studios can create films that are both socially conscious and engaging for audiences. I mean, they've been doing it for a very long time, so I don't know where this social amnesia came from, but maybe they should go back into their inventory and look at all the successful films. When you're more concentrated on storytelling and making something classy, and you're not a piece of shit person, the story will come first, and naturally you'll have a diverse cast. In not just ethnicity, but in character and all else, so that they beautifully come together to form the story that's supposed to be the chief and primary pillar to a successful franchise or tale. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Ultiori. You ask, we answer.